Hello and welcome to Divine Disbelief. I am Nathaniel, and today we're talking about something you likely haven't heard much about recently or haven't really considered very much recently, and that, of course, is Easter. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Uh, Nathaniel, Easter was like last Sunday. It's now next Thursday, unless you're watching this on a different date, or next Easter. So if that's the case, happy Easter 2022. And I guess if we make it that far, which, I mean, rate we're going right now, flip a coin on that one? Sure. Anyways, let's see. Let's see, make a joke about Easter, talk about next year not existing. Oh, right. Here we go. Easter. So Jesus was an incredibly important figure in Western civilization, maybe only surpassed by Alexander the Great.
The Balkans, Persia, Syria, Iraq, and Pakistan, and my expansion.
We're doing jump cuts now. That's the thing we're doing. We're doing jump cuts. Okay. Hey, by the way, thanks to the folks over at Epic Rap Battles of History for super not suing us or banning us from YouTube or whatever when we do that. Because there's going to be like a link in the description, I think. I don't know. I'm really not good at them, and Susan will probably add it later, or she's not here, or I don't really know. Anyways, Jesus, super important, right? Both of the world's largest religions. Let me see if I can make this one work now. There it is. These two right here, Christianity and Islam. And by the way, image courtesy of Christ Covenant Church in Knoxville, Tennessee for this photo. Thank you for that. Also, I did a Google image search and you just happen to be on it. So thanks. Anyways, a combined 4.2 billion people, which is 57% of the planet's population, have Jesus as a fairly main character. Especially this one right here with the cross and the empty tomb and the rising from the dead stuff. Anyways, the incredible stories of his birth, life, death, and resurrection have reached seemingly every country on the planet, and the stories about Jesus are not incredible. But should we accept them as historical facts? Can we even say a resurrection is something which can be examined by a historian? I mean, I wouldn't be making a video if I wasn't going to try to answer that question, guys. So, the most important part of the life of Jesus, and the only way Christianity can exist, has to do with the story of his resurrection. And I should state this, I agree with the overwhelming consensus of scholars and historians who also accept Jesus as a historical, even if not divine, person. Josephus writes in Jewish antiquities, about this time there lived Jesus, a wise man. He was one who performed surprising deeds, a teacher of people who received the truth with pleasure. He gained a following both among many Jews and among many of the Greeks. When Pilate, because of an accusation made by the leading men among us, condemned him to the cross, those who loved him previously did not cease to do so. And up until this very day, Christians named after him have not died out. So there's your extra biblical evidence, mythicists. And I'm taking a lot of digs at mythicists these days. I don't know why. I'm not even going to go into a conversation about the historical Jesus in this video, but I've uploaded another one on this channel, like this channel somewhere. I don't know, it's somewhere else. Feel free to check it out. It's got a few views on it. I need to probably update it because it's kind of all over the place, and I recorded it early last year whenever I first got to Portland. So anyways, I'm probably going to do that. Now, the part of the Easter story I care least about is the death of Jesus. As far as I can tell, every person, including every person recorded in Jewish history, I'm going to get some pushback on that one. Because, I mean, you know, Elijah and all of them, anyways, has died. It's not to say that there aren't glaring issues which we should talk about. Looking at you on whatever day that you said that that Jesus died, Gospel of John, chapter 19, verse 37, and which Polycarp, by the way, was totally all about. But that's anyways, that's for like, again, another whole thing. And some of y'all don't even know who the fuck Polycarp is, and that's fine. But it's the coming back to life thing that I talk about. Now, the Apostle Paul is correct when he says in 1 Corinthians 15, 12 to 14, now, if Christ is proclaimed as raised from the dead, how can some of you say there is no resurrection of the dead? But if there is no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain and our faith is in vain. Paul's own words show us we must critically examine the narratives and put the claims to the test. Researching antiquity is an incredibly difficult task. Oftentimes, there exists little, if any, evidence of certain events, people, places. There is much which has been lost forever to history. How, then, can we come to any conclusions regarding said events? Well, New Testament scholar Kiersop Lake provided a path when, at the turn of the 20th century, he said, the first task of the historian or the historical inquirer is to collect the pieces of evidence. The second is to discuss the trustworthiness and meaning of each separate piece. And the third is to reconstruct the events to which the evidence relates. I really, really like this method. So using this method as well as the 4-point approach and historical criterion utilized by Bart Ehrman and many other scholars and historians, name drop for clout, one should have an open mind and accept where the evidence leads. It is my hope that we do this not only when considering the resurrection of Jesus, but also in every other part of our lives as well. And to start, I would like to say this. The Bible is both the claim and provides what it would consider evidence for Jesus' resurrection. Whether one believes Jesus came back to life should be, while we are researching, irrelevant. And we should seek to rid ourselves of personal biases as we research. We should look into the claims in the Bible and determine, based on historical events, if the truth is contained within the biblical and extra-biblical accounts of the resurrection narratives. I will be spending a lot of my time discussing the reliability of the Gospels and if we should accept them as true. But other pieces, like my rejection of Habermas and Lacona's minimal facts approach, my rejection of the so-called criterion of embarrassment, not a real thing, C.S. Lewis's so-called trilemma, I'm not really going to mention those. I also won't go into depth regarding how not every supposed contradiction is actually that. If you would like me to go into a video or series regarding that which is mentioned above, please let me know. And I will say this. This website right here, this one, which supposedly has every contradiction in the Bible, it's laughably awful. Only surpassed maybe by the Skeptic's Annotated Bible, which, oh my goodness, would you look at that? The website gets all of their stuff from the Skeptics Annotated Bible. Don't fucking talk to me about circular reasoning ever again, atheist internet bros. Now, it is important for us, of course, to consider each claim on its own. While each claim, or while a series of claims with evidence can build a case, each bears its own burden of proof. And if it's a bear, I guess it bears a bear. And as it is said, the more extraordinary the claim, the more extraordinary is the evidence required. The case of a man coming back from the dead is, I don't know, man, pretty fucking extraordinary. Now, in a new history of early Christianity, famed Greek and Roman historian Charles Freeman says, the sources which describe the physical resurrection of Jesus are, for instance, so late, fragmentary, and contradictory that the question of whether it happened must be left open. He goes on to quote, and this is in the blue, Jewish historian Alan Siegel. Alan says, surely no one would seriously argue that the early Christians did not believe that Christ had been raised. But just as surely few, if any, modern historians would argue that any evidence could move us from this historical fact to the supposition that Jesus was actually and physically raised from the dead and that he appeared in his transformed fleshly body. It is therefore important to stay within the realms of historians and away from the ideas that theologians who have preconceived bias of their firmly held religious belief can provide us with answers. So, what do we have? Well, to start, Jesus never wrote anything. He never wrote anything about his life, ministry, or teachings. We actually don't know if Jesus could write. We don't know if he had the ability, the understanding of Greek. We just don't. Most of his followers were illiterate, and no document written by Jesus or about Jesus is by an eyewitness or contemporary. Trust me, I know this, mythicist atheists. I get it, all right? I know. But again, historians don't require things in antiquity to be fucking contemporary. We just want a lot of them if we can get them and to be close to the events. This is not that difficult. Anyways, while Jesus and his followers would have spoken Aramaic, there remains in the Bible 26, and they actually remain in the Bible 26 Aramaic words that are attributed to Jesus. Every other word is written in Greek. It is said that there are 5,600 surviving copies of the Greek New Testament, showing 99.5% accuracy between them. All right. That's really cool and everything. Papyrologist Bryce C. Jones located over 1,500 copies of the Iliad, showing 95% accuracy between them, and that was written, I don't know, like a century before the New Testament. Does that mean the Iliad is true because it has a lot of copies that are really old and agree with one another? No, of course not. No person would argue that that would be the case. Well, I don't want to say no person. If somebody accepts the Iliad as a religious viewpoint, then maybe they might. But again, is that good reasoning to accept anything? A preconceived theological bias? Now, the answer to that for the historian is no. The answer to that for the religious person is obviously yes. But the historian and the historical value is what we're looking for here. Let us consider memories. An account is given by Philip Ziegler in Our Longest Days, A People's History of the Second World War, in which the diaries kept by British observers were compared to their recollections 30 years later. His findings say this: any relationship between the incident they had described in the diary and the story they told in 1975 was almost entirely coincidental. They got everything wrong: the dates, places, the sequence of events. This is common. Memory researchers from a bevy of universities, and that's a lot. That's so many I could I don't know, it's super duper not easy to read because there's a ton of universities on there and a ton of memory researchers. They have to have a better term for memory researcher. You know what I mean? I'm just saying that doesn't, whatever. Surveyed more than 3,000 people in New York City, Washington, D.C., Boston, and 4 other cities in Connecticut, Missouri, and California regarding their flashbulb memory of the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001. At the third, my apologies, the surveys were completed at 1 week, 3 years, and 10 years after the attacks. According to lead investigator Elizabeth A. Phelps, from that first survey to the second survey, 1 year later, the overall consistency of the details of how they learned of 9/11 was only 63%. At the third survey, 3 years after the attack, consistency was 57%. Some people were only a little more than 50% right on a lot of the details. And she goes on to say they were particularly bad at remembering what their emotions were after 9/11. Accurate only 40% of the time, and that's after 1 year. And yet overall, for all those details, people's confidence in their memories was on average greater than a 4 on a scale of 1 to 5. Went forward a slide when I didn't need to. Doesn't really matter. We can take the obvious from these two examples. Our minds do not retain information the way that we think, even with memories which are monumentally important or cause grief. Surely the followers of Jesus had emotional responses to his death, but would still consider themselves confident in their accurate retelling of his life, death, and subsequent events. What we find, though, is their emotional responses would likely have had a negative effect on their memories. We can then state with a high degree of certainty that the accounts written decades and likely lifetimes after the death of Jesus contained a multitude of errors from the memories of those who first told the stories. This does not include later embellishment or outright legendary additions, which certainly occurred and should give us even more pause about the historical veracity of the supernatural claims made in the Gospels. This also means this: they were not necessarily lying. They likely believed every single word what they were saying. What about Paul? Paul is the only person in the Bible who affirms in the first person that he had an encounter with Jesus after he was dead. This is written in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 1 to 11, and is referenced in 1 Corinthians 9:1, Galatians 1:15 to 17, and Philippians 3:8. In his affirmation of seeing Jesus, Paul does not differentiate his experiences from any others, including Peter and James, the brother of Jesus. He uses the Greek verb opte, which means to see, or he was seen. Visions of the supernatural are not uncommon and certainly not unique to antiquity. Susan Atkins, convicted and imprisoned for life for her part in the Charles Manson cult and murder, converted to Christianity in 1974 after claiming that her cell door had opened and, quote, a brilliant light poured over her. She saw this as Jesus coming to let her know she was forgiven for her sins. Many others have had visions of the Virgin Mary, most notably 14-year-old Bernadette Soubirious of Lourdes, France, who in 1858 said she had seen, quote, a young, wondrously beautiful lady bathed in light, who she said called herself Immaculate Conception. Bernadette later said that she had been confused and considered the proceedings to be a deception, even going so far as to say she was pressured into claiming the Immaculate Conception portion of her claim. It should come as no surprise that Lourdes is known by the Catholic Church's recognition of more than 65 instances of miraculous healing, none of which I imagine came from Benny Hinn or Kenneth Copeland. Bernadette's story is one of many. Visions of the supernatural are common, especially when we are told about a particular account or set of events that led to the demise of a famous person or a character. At the La Laurie Mansion in New Orleans, people claim to hear the screams of the slaves who died in the 1834 house fire set by slaves who were chained, tortured, and mutilated upstairs. And others claim the screams come from the souls of the skeletons found buried underneath the house. People claim to see the ghosts of former inmates walking through Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. Claims of ghosts existing on the 8 RMS Queen Mary, at the Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast in Fall River, Massachusetts, and even the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, are just the tip of the proverbial iceberg of ghostly claims. Missed one. Doesn't really matter. We also see images or faces in clouds, on toast, or in the fire of the Notre Dame Cathedral a couple years ago. These types of pareidolia frequent our pattern-seeking brains. It doesn't mean they are real, and it certainly doesn't mean God or Jesus is judging the Catholic Church for tourism. Who is doing that is apparently Jesus, who I guess is like a fire elemental now or something. I don't really know, man. I don't really keep up with the Catholic Notre Dame burning things. Anyways, we also have dreams. There it is. Ghost Ship. Good film, by the way. Apparently they made another one. I don't know. Like, this is a good film. It's not what you think it is. That one? The fuck is that? Good film. Don't know. Good film. Seems like a ripoff. Great film. What is this? I don't know, man. Anyways, we have dreams what we think about. When I'm involved in theatrical productions, I oftentimes find myself dreaming about the shows, those involved in the show, and how the production will go. I also dreamt just, a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, that I went into a building in the pandemic without a mask on, and that I could not find a mask, and that one could not be provided for me. And it was fucking scary. It felt real, as dreams do, and things that we feel in our lives. On a more personal note, I have PTSD. My dreams are full of visions and memories, some of which are real memories and seem to have happened yesterday. Every so often, I wake up not knowing where I am, terrified. I see things in the dark. They aren't real, but they feel so real and I am so terrified that I find myself turning on the lights before I'm even fully awake or fully aware of what is going on. Many times, though, I don't remember anything, and I'm only told after the fact. My partner can verify this, and it's a scary time for everybody. I take medication to help with this, but this medication would not have been available to those living in antiquity. We also hallucinate when we face exhaustion or severe dehydration. Now, that doesn't mean the people who we are seeing in our visions aren't real. But the interactions we believe we're having with them is the result of physical and mental strain placed on our brains. Full conversations can happen with the person who we believe is there, and yet they are not. Then, and I have to thank Paul Enns for turning me on to these next couple of examples, there are bereavement hallucinations. In September 2018, horrible ghost shit movie again. Oh, it's Jesus again. There he is, the fire elemental. All right, cool. In September of 2018, Camp et al. Assessed bereavement hallucinations in 175 conjugally bereaved participants 4 years post-loss to explore whether these bereavement hallucinations were A, associated with psychological distress, and B, predicted by socio-demographic variables, personality, and or coping style. Participants with bereavement hallucinations scored significantly higher than those without them on prolonged grief, post-traumatic stress, depression, and emotional loneliness. Hierarchical logistic regression analyses showed avoidant coping, openness to experience, and length of marriage to significantly predict bereavement hallucinations, while detached coping was negatively associated with bereavement hallucinations. The study suggests that bereavement hallucinations may be an indicator of psychological distress in bereavement. I had a friend of mine tell me he was at the store waiting to check out. He was going to use his credit card, and he started talking to his wife, who was standing next to him, except his wife had died 2 years prior. That's not that's anecdotal, I understand, but that person has requested to remain anonymous. But it's not one of those, I was sitting on an airplane and this happened and all of a sudden the engines and all. No. This is a person who came to me and said, this is real. Because it is. It's safe to say that the disciples were fairly close to Jesus and suffered an incredible amount of psychological distress after his death, most notably because they expected him, the Messiah, to lead them in a Jewish uprising which would throw off the chains of subjugation to Rome and usher in God's kingdom, at which point the disciples would be given rule over the 12 tribes and Jesus would rule over them as King of Kings. This expectation was shown incorrect when Jesus thwarted any militaristic actions against those arresting him. If you remember, in the anonymous disciple in the book of Mark named Peter, Cephas in the book of John, went and chopped off the ear of somebody attempting to arrest Jesus, and Jesus turned around and told him not to. Said, no, do not do that. The words of Jesus are different in the Gospels when it comes to that, but the meaning is all the same. There is no violence here. Now we must put ourselves in the sandals of the disciples. They had just witnessed a tragic event that changed their entire viewpoint. The person they had spent nearly every waking moment the past few years, who they saw as the one who would bring revolution, who had been tortured and executed in just a few hours. They were lost and without a leader. They walked the 140 kilometers of desert wasteland from Jerusalem back to Galilee because they feared they too would be arrested and possibly executed. Well, I mean, maybe, I guess. They didn't actually go back in Luke or John, and Jesus tells them to stay in Jerusalem, and they do, and they never go to Galilee, and Jesus also tells them to put their hands in his wounds, but how is that possible if he has thrown off his earthly body, especially, and tells Mary, not that Mary, the other Mary, not to touch him at all because he hadn't yet ascended. But I'm sorry, I'm getting off track here. They had not slept since the previous night when Jesus was arrested. And their walk to their homeland would take about 30 hours, not including the stop for the Sabbath, depending on which gospel you read. Which at this point, how exactly did Jesus meet the two disciples on the road to Emmaus? And then the other disciples while they were walking in the country, or Cephas got up and ran to the tomb and nobody was with them except that one time when the disciple whom Jesus loved beat him in a foot race, but for some reason didn't go in the tomb because, I don't know. And I guess they were seeing who could run faster. And then Cephas went in first because the women didn't go to the tomb. And the women also totally went in the tomb. But Mary Magdalene, again, not the other Mary, also stooped in to look in the tomb and saw a man. Oh yeah, they also went in the tomb in Mark. And this time both Mary and the other Mary and Salome, but not the Salome from the proto-gospel of James, who basically gets Thanos snapped after she put her hand inside Mary's vagina to make sure she was still a virgin, and is only saved when Jesus, who was already walking around the cave, reaches out and touches her. I'm not joking. That's a real fucking thing that used to be in the Bible. Not two men, but Silver Surfer looking guys, and also two angels not outside the tomb, but sitting inside the headstone. And then one angel who does like an earthquake thing. And the stone was already rolled away, I guess. Or he rolled the stone away, but I guess it was already rolled away. Sure. Yeah. That's in Mark, Matthew, and Luke, right? No. Yeah. That sounds about right. Or I'm sorry, Mark, Luke, and John. Right? Okay, good. Those actually make sense. Cool. So she, Mary, not the other Mary, was next to the tomb and turned around and saw the guy she thought was the gardener, which is, I guess, is kind of odd for a tomb, but I don't know, mulch and stuff, I guess. Anyways, then hugged him because he appeared to her first, but then he also appeared to Cephas first. I'm trying to keep up with all the things here, but there's just so much going on. And then to the 12, let me get to this actually. Here we are. He appeared to Cephas first, and then he appeared to the 12. But how is that possible? When Judas was totally dead because he hung himself, but he also fell headlong, and they hadn't yet chosen Matthias. But hey, they're the ones who can handle snakes and forgive sins and raise the dead and straight up fucking murder people just by saying you're drawing your last breath, and then shadow heal people, of course, too. And then Jesus appearing to them, even though he had totally appeared to them right before they were fishing. And everybody good? Okay, my bad. I'm super duper sorry about that. Got off track. My bad. My bad about that. That's just something that happens. Sometimes you just get involved with it, and you know, you just can't help yourself. I told you I was gonna go into the discrepancies, and yeah, you know what I mean? It just happens sometimes. You just can't stop yourself. We're back on track, right? Sure, we're back on track. Going to Galilee and how they would not be sleeping and exhausted. Except now we're going to switch. We're actually going to stay in Jerusalem thing. Look, we're just going to push the story forward with Jerusalem. All right, that's what's happening. So ignore the other stuff. Jerusalem. So like, I don't know, not Luke and John. Wait, not Matthew and Mark. See? I'm just saying. Reconcilable. Anyways, as I was saying, they locked themselves in a room and hid, exhausted, still fearful of imminent death. Think about this and compare it to other situations. This is the perfect time for one or even numerous disciples to have had visions and dreams, hallucinations, whatever a person would want to call them. More than likely, one or more of them suffered from PTSD. And we have seen how that can affect an already damaged psyche. I am not saying this did happen. I don't believe the disciples saw a risen physical Jesus alive after he was dead. If there were in fact sightings by these men, we should consider what we know to be true about the circumstances and ask ourselves the most probable cause. Was it that these men had visions brought on by the aforementioned stresses and believed that they had seen the risen Christ? Or is it more likely that Jesus actually had risen from the dead? And yes, I read the chat, and actually appeared to them. But what about Paul? What about the vision of Paul that changed his life so dramatically? Now, I realize where a person might say that it's highly unlikely that Paul would have or would claim to have had so many visions, and he claims to have had more than one, most notably when he speaks about having gone to the third heaven, which is actually one of my favorite stories because he's super duper freaking sarcastic. And it is especially unlikely that so many people around him would also have visions and the like. For that, please consider the following. Number one, worldwide, over 280 million people, nearly the population of the United States, are part of an apostolic Pentecostal denomination, meaning they believe not only in the gifts of the Holy Spirit, but also that they have direct personal communication with God through baptism in the Holy Spirit. For the lay person, I kind of glitched there, apologies. For the lay person, one could say this is speaking in tongues as an example. These 280 million people congregate every Sunday morning and Wednesday evening and Thursday if you're really into Jesus and like the choir scene. They take part in singing, dancing, speaking in tongues. They also believe they can interpret these tongues, as well as interpret dreams. Many are so filled with what they believe is the Holy Ghost that they fall over, roll on the ground, shake, even lay on the ground, slain in the Spirit. I know that people firmly and honestly believe this because I did. I was part of an Assemblies of God, a Pentecostal denomination. For a very long time, I was an evangelical Christian. When I joined the Navy and went to A school in Pensacola, Florida, I was excited not because I was finally getting away from training in Chicago, but because I was going to be one of the nearly 3 million people to attend Brownsville Assembly of God, the site of the Brownsville revival. We believed a multitude of people had been healed of various ailments and that God was truly moving through the church. This only added more fuel to the fire that had been kindled when, as a high school senior, I attended Acquire the Fire. Get it? Fire which was kindled, acquire the fire. I don't appreciate it. Anyways, a now defunct traveling apostolic ministry headed by East Texan Ron Luce. The Houston Astrodome, like so many other sports venues, which would host the yearly event, was filled with young people just like me. We truly believed everything. Even Kurt Warner, who was still with the St. Louis Rams, was there. And that's how old I am. Just figure that shit out. In the end, I know people who are just like Paul. I also know people who listen to and believe what people like Paul are saying. Incredibly intelligent, otherwise rational people. I'm not saying Paul was lying. I don't think so. But nothing I experienced was real. I believed it was, honestly believed it was. And I believe that people today believe it's real. In reality, it was in my head. Something maybe subconsciously I wanted to believe in a community that accepted me, that open arms accepted me for who I was and pushed me, at least in their view, to be better, coming from a family that was broken, separated by thousands of miles from other people that I had no idea even existed sometimes. An apostolic church accepting with open arms somebody into a community and helping to get better. Why would a person run away from that? And that, of course, makes it easier to believe as well. Easier to believe when the people around you show what appears to be real love. And they appear to be steadfast in this, that it is true to them, that there is no dishonesty, that they're not lying. And dislike this video all you want. I don't care. I'm enjoying it. Doesn't really matter because the algorithm, even with the dislikes, means people will see it. But those people truly believe it, just like Paul did, just like I did. They believe it. So what does this mean? Can we determine the resurrection through the eyes of a historian? Does this mean we can guarantee the disciples simply had visions and Jesus was not raised from the dead? No and no. I don't personally believe that Jesus was raised from the dead. But it is a supernatural claim which cannot be either verified or negated using historical methods. Does this mean Jesus did not rise from the dead? No. This is a theological claim of a miracle. I don't accept it as a historical event and would state that I believe what I've even mentioned today builds a case for a solid foundation for my reasoning. But I cannot and will not make a theological claim, and it is an error for others to do so. I also believe Christians are not lying to themselves or any others, and accept the resurrection of Jesus as a historical reality and truth. I know all too well how difficult it is to view this through a lens which removes our personal bias, but I ask you to please do so. Please have patience with those you engage. Christians, please do not downplay. And I'm begging you of this, the anger that some have due to mental, physical, emotional, spiritual abuse suffered while part of the church or even as they currently attend the church. To those who don't believe, please do not refer to those who currently believe as uneducated, dumb, deluded, or any other unnecessary, demeaning, and ableist language. Much like me, many of you, especially if you're an American, were once Christians. And we were none of the above. Neither are they. And there's also this. You likely don't know nearly as much about the religion as you think you do. Now, it also, of course, applies to me, but it's important to note. Pride comes for a fall, you know what I mean? Stop it. Now, of course, you aren't off the hook, Christians. We can and should always look to learn more, many times by asking about a certain eschatology instead of asserting what we presume. That is so vital. Ask the questions and then move forward with honesty, respect, and dignity. I want to thank you for watching this video, and I'm going to leave you with this quote from Ferdinand Christian Bauer. Now, doubt in itself is not regrettable and reprehensible, but for the thinking person, the necessary means of arriving at a knowledge